The Wind in the Rosebush by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Ford Village has no railroad station, being on the other side of the river from Porter's Falls, and accessible only by the ford which gives it its name, and a ferry line. The ferry boat was waiting when Rebecca Flint got off the train with her bag and lunch basket. When she and her small trunk were safely embarked, she sat stiff and straight and calm in the ferry boat as it shot swiftly and smoothly across stream. There was a horse attached to a light country wagon on board, and he pawed the deck uneasily. His owner stood near, with a wary eye upon him, although he was chewing, with as dully reflective an expression as a cow. Beside Rebecca sat a woman of about her own age, who kept looking at her with furtive curiosity. Her husband, short and stout and saturnine, stood near her. Rebecca paid no attention to either of them. She was tall and spare and pale, the type of a spinster, yet with rudimentary lines and expressions of matronhood. She all unconsciously held her shawl, rolled up in a canvas bag, on her left hip, as if it had been a child. She wore a settled frown of dissent at life, but it was the frown of a mother who regarded life as a froward child, rather than as an overwhelming fate. The other woman continued staring at her. She was mildly stupid, except for an overdeveloped curiosity which made her at times sharp beyond belief. Her eyes glittered. Red spots came on her flaccid cheeks. She kept opening her mouth to speak, making little abortive motions. Finally, she could endure it no longer. She nudged Rebecca boldly. "A pleasant day," said she. Rebecca looked at her and nodded coldly. "Yes, very," she assented. "Have you come far?" "I've come from Michigan." "Oh," said the woman with awe. "It's a long way," she remarked presently. "Yes, it is," replied Rebecca conclusively. Still, the other woman was not daunted. There was something which she determined to know, possibly roused thereto by a vague sense of incongruity in the other's appearance. "It's a long ways to come and leave a family," she remarked with painful slyness. "I ain't got any family to leave," returned Rebecca shortly. "Then you ain't—" "No, I ain't." "Oh," said the woman. Rebecca looked straight ahead at the race of the river. It was a long ferry. Finally Rebecca herself waxed unexpectedly loquacious. She turned to the other woman and inquired if she knew John Dent's widow, who lived in Ford Village. "Her husband died about 3 years ago," she said by way of detail. The woman started violently. She turned pale, then she flushed. She cast a strange glance at her husband, who was regarding both women with a sort of stolid keenness. "Yes, I guess I do," faltered the woman finally. "Well, his first wife was my sister," said Rebecca, with the air of one imparting important intelligence. "Was she?" responded the other woman feebly. She glanced at her husband with an expression of doubt and terror, and he shook his head forbiddingly. "I'm going to see her, and take my niece Agnes home with me," said Rebecca. Then the woman gave such a violent start that she noticed it. "What is the matter?" she asked. "Nothing, I guess," replied the woman, with eyes on her husband, who was slowly shaking his head, like a Chinese toy. "Is my niece sick?" asked Rebecca with quick suspicion. "No, she ain't sick," replied the woman with alacrity. Then she caught her breath with a gasp. "When did you see her?" "Let me see. I ain't seen her for some little time," replied the woman. Then she caught her breath again. "She ought to have grown up real pretty, if she takes after my sister. She was a real pretty woman," Rebecca said wistfully. "Yes, I guess she did grow up pretty," replied the woman in a trembling voice. "What kind of a woman is the second wife?" The woman glanced at her husband's warning face, She continued to gaze at him while she replied in a choking voice to Rebecca. "I guess she's a nice woman," she replied. "I don't know. I guess so. I don't see much of her." "I felt kind of hurt that John married again so quick," said Rebecca. "But I suppose he wanted his house kept, and Agnes wanted care. I wasn't so situated that I could take her when her mother died. I had my own mother to care for, and I was school teaching. Now mother has gone, and my uncle died 6 months ago and left me quite a little property, and I've given up my school, and I've come for Agnes. I guess she'll be glad to go with me, though I suppose her stepmother is a good woman and has always done for her." The man's warning shake at his wife was fairly portentous. "I guess so," said she. "John always wrote that she was a beautiful woman," said Rebecca. Then the ferry boat grated on the shore. John Dent's widow had sent a horse and wagon to meet her sister-in-law. When the woman and her husband went down the road, on which Rebecca in the wagon with her trunk soon passed them, she said reproachfully, "Seems as if I'd ought to have told her, Thomas." "Let her find it out herself," replied the man. "Don't you go to burning your fingers in other folks' pudding, Maria." "Do you suppose she'll see anything?" asked the woman, with a spasmodic shudder and a terrified roll of her eyes. "See," returned her husband with stolid scorn. "Better be sure there's anything to see." "Oh, Thomas, they say—" "Lord, ain't you found out that what they say is mostly lies?" "But if it should be true, and she's a nervous woman, she might be scared enough to lose her wits," said his wife, staring uneasily after Rebecca's erect figure in the wagon, disappearing over the crest of the hilly road. "Wits that so easy upset ain't worth much," declared the man. "You keep out of it, Maria." Rebecca, in the meantime, rode on in the wagon, beside a flaxen-headed boy, who looked, to her understanding, not very bright. She asked him a question, and he paid no attention. She repeated it, and he responded with a bewildered and incoherent grunt. Then she let him alone, after making sure that he knew how to drive straight. They had traveled about half a mile, past the village square, and gone a short distance beyond, when the boy drew up with a sudden "whoa" before a very prosperous-looking house. It had been one of the aboriginal cottages of the vicinity, small and white, with the roof extending on one side over a piazza, and a tiny L jutting out in the rear, on the right hand. Now the cottage was transformed by dormer windows, a bay window on the piazza-less side, a carved railing down the front steps, and a modern hardwood door. "Is this John Dent's house?" asked Rebecca. The boy was as sparing of speech as a philosopher. His only response was in flinging the reins over the horse's back, stretching out one foot to the shaft, and leaping out of the wagon, then going around to the rear for the trunk. Rebecca got out and went toward the house. Its white paint had a new gloss. Its blinds were an immaculate apple green. The lawn was trimmed as smooth as velvet, and it was dotted with scrupulous groups of hydrangeas and cannas. "I always understood that John Dent was well-to-do," Rebecca reflected comfortably. "I guess Agnes will have considerable. I've got enough, but it will come in handy for her schooling. She can have advantages." The boy dragged the trunk up the fine gravel walk, but before he reached the steps leading up to the piazza, for the house stood on a terrace, the front door opened, and a fair, frizzled head of a very large and handsome woman appeared. She held up her black silk skirt, disclosing voluminous ruffles of starched embroidery, and waited for Rebecca. She smiled placidly. Her pink, double-chinned face widened and dimpled, but her blue eyes were wary and calculating. She extended her hand as Rebecca climbed the steps. "This is Miss Flint, I suppose," said she. "Yes, ma'am," replied Rebecca, noticing with bewilderment a curious expression compounded of fear and defiance on the other's face. "Your letter only arrived this morning," said Mrs. Dent in a steady voice. Her great face was a uniform pink, and her china blue eyes were at once aggressive and veiled with secrecy. "Yes, I hardly thought you'd get my letter," replied Rebecca. "I felt as if I could not wait to hear from you before I came. I supposed you would be so situated that you could have me a little while without putting you out too much, from what John used to write me about his circumstances, and when I had that money so unexpected, I felt as if I must come for Agnes. I suppose you'll be willing to give her up. You know she's my own blood, and of course she's no relation to you, though you must have got attached to her. I know from her picture what a sweet girl she must be, and John always said she looked like her own mother, and Grace was a beautiful woman, if she was my sister." Rebecca stopped and stared at the other woman in amazement and alarm. The great handsome blonde creature stood speechless, livid, gasping, with her hand to her heart, her lips parted in a horrible caricature of a smile. "Are you sick?" cried Rebecca, drawing near. "Don't you want me to get you some water?" Then Mrs. Dent recovered herself with a great effort. "It is nothing," she said. "I am subject to spells. I'm over it now. Won't you come in, Miss Flint?" As she spoke, the beautiful deep rose color suffused her face. Her blue eyes met her visitor's with the opaqueness of turquoise, with a revelation of blue, but a concealment of all behind. Rebecca followed her hostess in, and the boy, who had waited quiescently, climbed the steps with the trunk. But before they entered the door, a strange thing happened. On the upper terrace, close to the piazza post, grew a great rose bush, and on it, late in the season though it was, one small, red, perfect rose. Rebecca looked at it, and the other woman extended her hand with a quick gesture. "Don't you pick that rose," she brusquely cried. Rebecca drew herself up with stiff dignity. "I ain't in the habit of picking other folks' roses without leave," said she. As Rebecca spoke, she started violently, and lost sight of her resentment, for something singular happened. Suddenly the rose-bush was agitated violently, as if by a gust of wind, yet it was a remarkably still day. Not a leaf of the hydrangea standing on the terrace close to the rose trembled. "What on earth—" began Rebecca. Then she stopped with a gasp at the sight of the other woman's face. Although a face, it gave somehow the impression of a desperately clutched hand of secrecy. "Come in," said she in a harsh voice, which seemed to come forth from her chest with no intervention of the organs of speech. "Come into the house. I'm getting cold out here." "What makes that rose-bush blow so, when there isn't any wind?" asked Rebecca, trembling with vague horror, yet resolute. "I don't see as it is blowing," returned the woman calmly, and as she spoke, indeed the bush was quiet. "It was blowing," declared Rebecca. "It isn't now," said Mrs. Dent. "I can't try to account for everything that blows out of doors. I have too much to do." She spoke scornfully and confidently, with defiant, unflinching eyes, first on the bush, then on Rebecca, and led the way into the house. "It looked queer," persisted Rebecca, but she followed, and also the boy with the trunk. Rebecca entered an interior, prosperous, even elegant, according to her simple ideas. There were Brussels carpets, lace curtains, and plenty of brilliant upholstery and polished wood. "You're real nicely situated," remarked Rebecca, after she had become a little accustomed to her new surroundings, and the two women were seated at the tea-table. Mrs. Dent stared with a hard complacency from behind her silver-plated service. "Yes, I be," said she. "You got all the things new?" said Rebecca hesitatingly, with a jealous memory of her dead sister's bridal furnishings. "Yes," said Mrs. Dent. "I was never one to want dead folks' things, and I had money enough of my own, so I wasn't beholden to John. I had the old duds put up at auction, They didn't bring much. I suppose you saved some for Agnes. She'll want some of her poor mother's things when she is grown up, said Rebecca with some indignation. The defiant stare of Mrs. Dent's blue eyes waxed more intense. There's a few things up garret, said she. She'll be likely to value them, remarked Rebecca. As she spoke, she glanced at the window. Isn't it most time for her to be coming home? She asked. Most time, answered Mrs. Dent carelessly. But when she gets over to Addie Slocum's, she never knows when to come home. Is Addie Slocum her intimate friend? Intimate as any. Maybe we can have her come out to see Agnes when she's living with me, said Rebecca wistfully. I suppose she'll be likely to be homesick at first. Most likely, answered Mrs. Dent. Does she call you Mother? Rebecca asked. No, she calls me Aunt Emmeline, replied the other woman shortly. When did you say you were going home? In about a week, I thought, if she can be ready to go so soon, answered Rebecca with a surprised look. She reflected that she would not remain a day longer than she could help, after such an inhospitable look and question. Oh, as far as that goes, said Mrs. Dent, it wouldn't make any difference about her being ready. You could go home whenever you felt that you must, and she could come afterward. Alone? Why not? She's a big girl now, and you don't have to change cars. My niece will go home when I do, and not travel alone, and if I can't wait here for her, in the house that used to be her mother's and my sister's home, I'll go and board somewhere, returned Rebecca with warmth. Oh, you can stay here as long as you want to. You're welcome, said Mrs. Dent. Then Rebecca started. There she is, she declared in a trembling, exultant voice. Nobody knew how she longed to see the girl. She isn't as late as I thought she'd be, said Mrs. Dent. And again that curious, subtle change passed over her face, and again it settled into that stony impassiveness. Rebecca stared at the door, waiting for it to open. Where is she? She asked presently. I guess she's stopped to take off her hat in the entry, suggested Mrs. Dent. Rebecca waited. Why don't she come? It can't take her all this time to take off her hat. For answer, Mrs. Dent rose with a stiff jerk and threw open the door. Agnes, she called. Agnes. Then she turned and eyed Rebecca. She ain't there. I saw her pass the window, said Rebecca in bewilderment. You must have been mistaken. I know I did, persisted Rebecca. You couldn't have. I did. I saw first a shadow go over the ceiling, then I saw her in the glass there. She pointed to a mirror over the sideboard opposite. And then the shadow passed the window. How did she look in the glass? Little and light-haired, with the light hair kind of tossing over her forehead. You couldn't have seen her. Was that like Agnes? Like enough. But of course you didn't see her. You've been thinking so much about her that you thought you did. You thought you did? I thought I saw a shadow pass the window, but I must have been mistaken. She didn't come in, or we would have seen her before now. I knew it was too early for her to get home from Addie Slocum's anyhow. When Rebecca went to bed, Agnes had not returned. Rebecca had resolved that she would not retire until the girl came, but she was very tired, and she reasoned with herself that she was foolish. Besides, Mrs. Dent suggested that Agnes might go to the church social with Addie Slocum. When Rebecca suggested that she be sent for, and told that her aunt had come, Mrs. Dent laughed meaningly. I guess you'll find out that a young girl ain't so ready to leave a sociable where there's boys to see her aunt, said she. She's too young, said Rebecca incredulously and indignantly. She's 16, replied Mrs. Dent, and she's always been great for the boys. She's going to school 4 years after I get her before she thinks of boys, declared Rebecca. We'll see, laughed the other woman. After Rebecca went to bed, She lay awake a long time, listening for the sound of girlish laughter and a boy's voice under her window. Then she fell asleep. The next morning she was down early. Mrs. Dent, who kept no servants, was busily preparing breakfast. "Don't Agnes help you about breakfast?" asked Rebecca. "No, I let her lay," replied Mrs. Dent shortly. "What time did she get home last night?" "She didn't get home." "What?" "She didn't get home. She stayed with Addie. She often does." "Without sending you word?" "Oh, she knew I wouldn't worry." "When will she be home?" "Oh, I guess she'll be along pretty soon." Rebecca was uneasy, but she tried to conceal it, for she knew of no good reason for uneasiness. What was there to occasion alarm in the fact of one young girl staying overnight with another? She could not eat much breakfast. Afterward, she went out on the little piazza, although her hostess strove furtively to stop her. "Why don't you go out back of the house? It's real pretty, a view over the river," she said. "I guess I'll go out here," replied Rebecca. She had a purpose, to watch for the absent girl. Presently Rebecca came hustling into the house through the sitting room, into the kitchen where Mrs. Dent was cooking. "That rose bush!" she gasped. Mrs. Dent turned and faced her. "What of it?" "It's a blowin'." "What of it?" "There isn't a mite of wind this morning." Mrs. Dent turned with an inimitable toss of her fair head. "If you think I can spend my time puzzling over such nonsense," she began. But Rebecca interrupted her with a cry and a rush to the door. "There she is now!" she cried. She flung the door wide open, and curiously enough, a breeze came in, and her own gray hair tossed, and a paper blew off the table to the floor with a loud rustle. But there was nobody in sight. "There's nobody here," Rebecca said. She looked blankly at the other woman, who brought a rolling pin down on a slab of pie crust with a thud. "I didn't hear anybody," she said calmly. "I saw somebody pass that window." "You were mistaken again." "I know I saw somebody." "You couldn't have. Please shut that door." Rebecca shut the door. She sat down beside the window and looked out on the autumnal yard, with its little curve of footpath to the kitchen door. "What smells so strong of roses in this room?" she said presently. She sniffed hard. "I don't smell anything but these nutmegs." "It is not nutmeg." "I don't smell anything else." "Where do you suppose Agnes is?" "Oh, perhaps she has gone over the ferry to Porter's Falls with Addie. She often does. Addie's got an aunt over there, and Addie's got a cousin, a real pretty boy." "You suppose she's gone over there?" "Maybe. I shouldn't wonder." "When should she be home?" "Oh, not before afternoon." Rebecca waited with all the patience she could muster. She kept reassuring herself, telling herself that it was all natural, that the other woman could not help it, but she made up her mind that if Agnes did not return that afternoon, she should be sent for. When it was 4 o'clock, she started up with resolution. She had been furtively watching the onyx clock on the sitting-room mantel. She had timed herself. She had said that if Agnes was not home by that time, she should demand that she be sent for. She rose and stood before Mrs. Dent, who looked up coolly from her embroidery. "I've waited just about as long as I'm going to," she said. "I've come away from Michigan to see my own sister's daughter and take her home with me. I've been here ever since yesterday, 24 hours, and I haven't seen her. Now I'm going to. I want her sent for." Mrs. Dent folded her embroidery and rose. "Well, I don't blame you," she said. "It is high time she came home. I'll go right over and get her myself." Rebecca heaved a sigh of relief. She hardly knew what she had suspected or feared, but she knew that her position had been one of antagonism, if not accusation, and she was sensible of relief. "I wish you would," she said gratefully, and went back to her chair while Mrs. Dent got her shawl and her little white head tie. "I wouldn't trouble you, but I do feel as if I couldn't wait any longer to see her," she remarked apologetically. "Oh, it ain't any trouble at all," said Mrs. Dent as she went out. "I don't blame you. You have waited long enough." Rebecca sat at the window watching breathlessly until Mrs. Dent came stepping through the yard alone. She ran to the door and saw, hardly noticing it this time, that the rosebush was again violently agitated, yet with no wind evident elsewhere. "Where is she?" she cried. Mrs. Dent laughed with stiff lips as she came up the steps over the terrace. "Girls will be girls," said she. "She's gone with Addie to Lincoln. Addie's got an uncle who's conductor on the train and lives there, and he got 'em passes, and they're going to stay to Addie's Aunt Margaret's a few days. Mrs. Slocum said Addie didn't have time to come over and ask me before the train went, but she took it on herself to say it would be all right, and why hadn't she been over to tell you?" Rebecca was angry, though not suspicious. She even saw no reason for her anger. "Oh, she was putting up grapes. She was coming over just as soon as she got the black off her hands. She heard I had company, and her hands were a sight. She was holding them over sulphur matches." "You say she's going to stay a few days?" repeated Rebecca dazedly. "Yes, till Thursday, Mrs. Slocum said." "How far is Lincoln from here?" "About 50 miles. It'll be a real treat to her. Mrs. Slocum's sister is a real nice woman." "It is going to make it pretty late about my going home." "If you don't feel as if you could wait, I'll get her ready and send her on just as soon as I can," Mrs. Dent said sweetly. "I'm going to wait," said Rebecca grimly. The two women sat down again, and Mrs. Dent took up her embroidery. "Is there any sewing I can do for her?" Rebecca asked finally in a desperate way. "If I can get her sewing along some." Mrs. Dent arose with alacrity and fetched a mass of white from the closet. "Here," she said. "If you want to sew the lace on this nightgown, I was going to put her to it, but she'll be glad enough to get rid of it. She ought to have this and one more before she goes. I don't like to send her away without some good underclothing." Rebecca snatched at the little white garment and sewed feverishly. That night she wakened from a deep sleep a little after midnight, and lay a minute trying to collect her faculties and explain to herself what she was listening to. At last she discovered that it was the then popular strains of "The Maiden's Prayer" floating up through the floor from the piano in the sitting-room below. She jumped up, threw a shawl over her nightgown, and hurried downstairs trembling. There was nobody in the sitting-room. The piano was silent. She ran to Mrs. Dent's bedroom and called hysterically, "Emmeline! Emmeline!" "What is it?" asked Mrs. Dent's voice from the bed. The voice was stern, but had a note of consciousness in it. Who was that playing the Maiden's Prayer in the sitting-room on the piano?" "I didn't hear anybody." "There was someone." "I didn't hear anything." "I tell you there was someone, but there ain't anybody there." "I didn't hear anything." "I did. Somebody was playing the Maiden's Prayer on the piano. Has Agnes got home? I want to know." "Of course Agnes hasn't got home," answered Mrs. Dent with rising inflection. "Be you gone crazy over that girl? The last boat from Porter's Falls was in before we went to bed. Of course she ain't come." "I heard you were dreaming." "I wasn't. I was broad awake." Rebecca went back to her chamber and kept her lamp burning all night. The next morning her eyes upon Mrs. Dent were wary and blazing with suppressed excitement. She kept opening her mouth as if to speak, then frowning and setting her lips hard. After breakfast she went upstairs and came down presently with her coat and bonnet. "Now, Emmeline," she said, "I want to know where the Slocums live." Mrs. Dent gave a strange, long, half-lidded glance at her. She was finishing her coffee. "Why?" she asked. "I'm going over there and find out if they have heard anything from her daughter and Agnes since they went away. I don't like what I heard last night." "You must have been dreaming." "It don't make any odds whether I was or not. Does she play the Maiden's Prayer on the piano? I want to know." "What if she does? She plays it a little, I believe. I don't know. She don't half play it anyhow. She ain't got an ear." "That wasn't half played last night. I don't like such things happening. I ain't superstitious, but I don't like it. I'm going. Where do the Slocums live?" "You go down the road, over the bridge, past the old grist mill, then you turn to the left. It's the only house for half a mile. You can't miss it. It has a barn with a ship in full sail on the cupola." "Well, I'm going. I don't feel easy." About 2 hours later, Rebecca returned. There were red spots on her cheeks. She looked wild. "I've been there," she said, "and there isn't a soul at home. Something has happened." "What has happened?" "I don't know. Something. I had a warning last night. There wasn't a soul there. They've been sent for to Lincoln." "Did you see anybody to ask?" asked Mrs. Dent with thinly concealed anxiety. "I asked the woman that lives on the turn of the road. She's stone deaf. I suppose you know. She listened while I screamed at her to know where the Slocums were, and then she said, 'Mrs. Smith don't live here.' I didn't see anybody on the road, and that's the only house. What do you suppose it means?" "I don't suppose it means much of anything," replied Mrs. Dent coolly. "Mr. Slocum is conductor on the railroad, and he'd be away anyway. And Mrs. Slocum often goes early when he does, to spend the day with her sister in Porter's Falls. She'd be more likely to go away than Addie." "And you don't think anything has happened?" Rebecca asked, with diminishing distrust before the reasonableness of it. "Land, no." Rebecca went upstairs to lay aside her coat and bonnet, but she came hurrying back with them still on. "Who's been in my room?" she gasped. Her face was pale as ashes. Mrs. Dent also paled as she regarded her. "What do you mean?" she asked slowly. "I found, when I went upstairs, that little nightgown of Agnes's on the bed, laid out. It was laid out. The sleeves were folded across the bosom, and there was that little red rose between them." "Emmeline, what is it? Emmeline, what's the matter? Oh!" Mrs. Dent was struggling for breath in great, choking gasps. She clung to the back of a chair. Rebecca, trembling herself so she could scarcely keep on her feet, got her some water. As soon as she recovered herself, Mrs. Dent regarded her with eyes full of the strangest mixture of fear and horror and hostility. "What do you mean, talking so?" she said in a hard voice. "It is there." "Nonsense. You threw it down and it fell that way." "It was folded in my bureau drawer." "It couldn't have been." "Who picked that red rose?" "Look on the bush," Mrs. Dent replied shortly. Rebecca looked at her. Her mouth gaped. She hurried out of the room. When she came back, her eyes seemed to protrude. She had in the meantime hastened upstairs and come down with tottering steps, clinging to the banisters. "Now I want to know what all this means," she demanded. What means?" "The rose is on the bush, and it's gone from the bed in my room. Is this house haunted, or what?" "I don't know anything about a house being haunted. I don't believe in such things. Be you crazy?" Mrs. Dent spoke with gathering force. The color flashed back to her cheeks. "No," said Rebecca shortly. "I ain't crazy yet, but I shall be if this keeps on much longer. I'm going to find out where that girl is before night." Mrs. Dent eyed her. "What be you going to do?" "I'm going to Lincoln." A faint triumphant smile overspread Mrs. Dent's large face. "You can't," said she. "There ain't any train." "No train?" "No. There ain't any afternoon train from the Falls to Lincoln." "Then I'm going over to the Slocums again tonight." However, Rebecca did not go. Such a rain came up as deterred even her resolution, and she had only her best dresses with her. Then in the evening came the letter from the Michigan village which she had left nearly a week ago. It was from her cousin, a single woman who had come to keep her house while she was away. It was a pleasant, unexciting letter enough, all the first of it, and related mostly how she missed Rebecca, how she hoped she was having pleasant weather and kept her health, and how her friend, Mrs. Greenaway, had come to stay with her since she had felt lonesome the first night in the house. How she hoped Rebecca would have no objections to this, although nothing had been said about it, since she had not realized that she might be nervous alone. The cousin was painfully conscientious, hence the letter. Rebecca smiled in spite of her disturbed mind as she read it. Then her eye caught the postscript. That was in a different hand, purporting to be written by the friend, Mrs. Hannah Greenaway, informing her that the cousin had fallen down the cellar stairs and broken her hip, and was in a dangerous condition, and begging Rebecca to return at once, as she herself was rheumatic and unable to nurse her properly, and no one else could be obtained. Rebecca looked at Mrs. Dent, who had come to her room with the letter quite late. It was 9:30, and she had gone upstairs for the night. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Mr. Amblecrom brought it," she replied. "Who's he?" "The postmaster. He often brings the letters that come on the late mail. He knows I ain't anybody to send. He brought yours about your coming. He said he and his wife came over on the ferry boat with you." "I remember him," Rebecca replied shortly. "There's bad news in this letter." Mrs. Dent's face took on an expression of serious inquiry. "Yes, my cousin Harriet has fallen down the cellar stairs. They were always dangerous, and she's broken her hip, and have got to take the first train home tomorrow." "You don't say so. I'm dreadfully sorry." "No, you ain't sorry," said Rebecca, with a look as if she leaped. "You're glad. I don't know why, but you're glad. You've wanted to get rid of me for some reason ever since I came. I don't know why. You're a strange woman. Now you've got your way, and I hope you're satisfied." "How you talk!" Mrs. Dent spoke in a faintly injured voice, but there was a light in her eyes. "I talk the way it is. Well, I'm going home tomorrow morning, and I want you, just as soon as Agnes Dent comes home, to send her out to me. Don't you wait for anything. You pack what clothes she's got, and don't wait even to mend them, and you buy her ticket. I'll leave the money, and you send her along. She don't have to change cars. You start her off when she gets home on the next train." "Very well," replied the other woman. She had an expression of covert amusement. "Mind you do it." "Very well, Rebecca." Rebecca started on her journey the next morning. When she arrived 2 days later, she found her cousin in perfect health. She found, moreover, that the friend had not written the postscript in the cousin's letter. Rebecca would have returned to Ford Village the next morning, but the fatigue and nervous strain had been too much for her. She was not able to move from her bed. She had a species of low fever induced by anxiety and fatigue. But she could write, and she did, to the Slocums, and she received no answer. She also wrote to Mrs. Dent. She even sent numerous telegrams, with no response. Finally, she wrote to the postmaster, and an answer arrived by the first possible mail. The letter was short, curt, and to the purpose. Mr. Amblecrom, the postmaster, was a man of few words, and especially wary as to his expressions in a letter. "Dear Madam," he wrote, "your favor received. No Slocums in Ford's Village. All dead. Addie 10 years ago, her mother 2 years later, Her father 5. House vacant. Mrs. John Dent said to have neglected stepdaughter. Girl was sick. Medicine not given. Talk of taking action. Not enough evidence. House said to be haunted. Strange sights and sounds. Your niece, Agnes Dent, died a year ago, about this time. Yours truly, Thomas Amblecrom.
The Woman's Ghost Story by Algernon Blackwood. Yes, she said from her seat in the dark corner. I'll tell you an experience if you care to listen. And what's more, I'll tell it briefly, without trimmings. I mean, without unessentials. That's a thing storytellers never do, you know, she laughed. They drag in all the unessentials and leave their listeners to disentangle. But I'll give you just the essentials, and you can make of it what you please. But on one condition, that at the end you ask no questions, because I can't explain it and have no wish to. We agreed. We were all serious. After listening to a dozen prolix stories from people who merely wished to talk but had nothing to tell, we wanted essentials. In those days, she began, feeling from the quality of our silence that we were with her, in those days I was interested in psychic things and had arranged to sit up alone in a haunted house in the middle of London. It was a cheap and dingy lodging house in a main street, unfurnished. I had already made a preliminary examination in daylight that afternoon, and the keys from the caretaker, who lived next door, were in my pocket. The story was a good one, satisfied me at any rate that it was worth investigating, and I won't weary you with details as to the woman's murder and all the tiresome elaboration as to why the place was alive. Enough that it was. I was a good deal bored, therefore, to see a man whom I took to be the talkative old caretaker waiting for me on the steps when I went in at 11 p.m., for I'd sufficiently explained that I wished to be there alone for the night. "I wish to show you the room," he mumbled, and of course I couldn't exactly refuse, having tipped him for the temporary loan of a chair and table. "Come in, then, and let's be quick," I said. We went in, he shuffling after me through the unlighted hall, up to the first floor where the murder had taken place, and I prepared myself to hear his inevitable account before turning him out with the half-crown his persistence had earned. After lighting the gas, I sat down in the armchair he'd provided, a faded brown plush armchair, and turned for the first time to face him and get through with the performance as quickly as possible. And it was in that instant I got my first shock. The man was not the caretaker. It was not the old fool, Carey, I had interviewed earlier in the day and made my plans with. My heart gave a horrid jump. "Now who are you, I pray?" I said. "You're not Carey, the man I arranged with this afternoon. Who are you?" I felt uncomfortable, as you may imagine. I was a psychical researcher and a young woman of new tendencies, and proud of my liberty, but I did not care to find myself in an empty house with a stranger. Something of my confidence left me. Confidence with women, you know, is all humbug after a certain point, or perhaps you don't know, for most of you are men. But anyhow, my pluck ebbed in a quick rush, and I felt afraid. "Who are you?" I repeated quickly and nervously. The fellow was well dressed, youngish and good-looking, but with a face of great sadness. I myself was barely 30. I am giving you essentials, or I would not mention it. Out of quite ordinary things comes this story. I think that's why it has value. "No," he said. "I'm the man who was frightened to death." His voice and his words ran through me like a knife, and I felt ready to drop. In my pocket was the book I'd bought to make notes in. I felt the pencil sticking in the socket. I felt, too, the extra warm things I'd put on to sit up in, as no bed or sofa was available. 100 things dashed through my mind, foolishly and without sequence or meaning, as the way is when one is really frightened. Unessentials leaped up and puzzled me, and I thought of what the papers might say if it came out, and what my smart brother-in-law would think, and whether it would be told that I had cigarettes in my pocket and was a free thinker. The man who was frightened to death, I repeated, aghast. That's me, he said stupidly. I stared at him just as you would have done, any one of you men now listening to me, and felt my life ebbing and flowing like a sort of hot fluid. You needn't laugh, that's how I felt. Small things, you know, touch the mind with great earnestness when terror is there. Real terror. But I might have been at a middle-class tea party for all the ideas I had. They were so ordinary. But I thought you were the caretaker I tipped this afternoon to let me sleep here, I gasped. Did Carrie send you to meet me? No, he replied in a voice that touched my boots somehow. I am the man who was frightened to death. And what's more, I am frightened now. So am I managed to utter, speaking instinctively. I'm simply terrified. Yes, he replied in that same odd voice that seemed to sound within me. But you are still in the flesh, and I am not. I felt the need for vigorous self-assertion. I stood up in that empty, unfurnished room, digging the nails into my palms and clenching my teeth. I was determined to assert my individuality and my courage as a new woman and a free soul. You mean to say you are not in the flesh? I gasped. What in the world are you talking about? The silence of the night swallowed up my voice. For the first time I realized that darkness was over the city, that dust lay upon the stairs, that the floor above was untenanted and the floor below empty. I was alone, in an unoccupied and haunted house, unprotected, and a woman. I chilled. I heard the wind round the house, and knew the stars were hidden. My thoughts rushed to policemen and omnibuses and everything that was useful and comforting. I suddenly realized what a fool I was to come to such a house alone. I was icily afraid. I thought the end of my life had come. I was an utter fool to go in for psychical research when I had not the necessary nerve. Good God, I gasped. If you're not Carrie, the man I arranged with, who are you? I was really stiff with terror. The man moved slowly towards me across the empty room. I held out my arm to stop him, getting up out of my chair at the same moment, and he came to halt just opposite to me, a smile on his worn, sad face. I told you who I am, he repeated quietly with a sigh, looking at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen, and I am frightened still. By this time I was convinced that I was entertaining either a rogue or a madman, and I cursed my stupidity in bringing the man in without having seen his face. My mind was quickly made up, and I knew what to do. Ghosts and psychic phenomena flew to the winds. If I angered the creature, my life might pay the price. I must humour him till I got to the door, and then race for the street. I stood bolt upright and faced him. We were about of a height, and I was a strong, athletic woman who played hockey in winter and climbed Alps in summer. My hand itched for a stick, but I had none. Now, of course, I remember, I said with a sort of stiff smile that was very hard to force. Now I remember your case and the wonderful way you behaved. The man stared at me stupidly, turning his head to watch me as I backed more and more quickly to the door. But when his face broke into a smile, I could control myself no longer. I reached the door in a run and shot out onto the landing. Like a fool, I turned the wrong way and stumbled over the stairs leading to the next story. But it was too late to change. The man was after me, I was sure, though no sound of footsteps came, and I dashed up the next flight, tearing my skirt and banging my ribs in the darkness. and rushed headlong into the first room I came to. Luckily, the door stood ajar, and still more fortunate, there was a key in the lock. In a second I'd slammed the door, flung my whole weight against it, and turned the key. I was safe, but my heart was beating like a drum. A second later it seemed to stop altogether, for I saw that there was someone else in the room besides myself. A man's figure stood between me and the windows, where the street lamps gave just enough light to outline his shape against the glass. I'm a plucky woman, you know, for even then I didn't give up hope. But I may tell you that I've never felt so vilely frightened in all my born days. I had locked myself in with him. The man leaned against the window, watching me where I lay in a collapsed heap on the floor. So there were two men in the house with me, I reflected. Perhaps other rooms were occupied too. What could it all mean? But as I stared, something changed in the room, or in me, hard to say which, and I realized my mistake, so that my fear, which had so far been physical, at once altered its character and became psychical. I became afraid in my soul instead of in my heart, and I knew immediately who this man was. "How in the world did you get up here?" I stammered to him across the empty room, amazement momentarily stemming my fear. "Now let me tell you," he began, in that odd, far-away voice of his that went down my spine like a knife. "I'm in different space, for one thing, and you'd find me in any room you went into. For according to your way of measuring, I'm all over the house. Space is a bodily condition, but I am out of the body and am not affected by space. It's my condition that keeps me here. I want something to change my condition for me, for then I could get away. What I want is sympathy, or really more than sympathy. I want affection. I want love." While he was speaking, I gathered myself slowly upon my feet. I wanted to scream and cry and laugh all at once, but I only succeeded in sighing, for my emotion was exhausted and a numbness was coming over me. I felt for the matches in my pocket and made a movement toward the gas jet. "I should be much happier if you didn't light the gas," he said at once, "for the vibrations of your light hurt me a good deal. You need not be afraid that I shall injure you. I can't touch your body to begin with, for there's a great gulf fixed, you know, and really this half-light suits me best. Now let me continue what I was trying to say before. You know, so many people have come to this house to see me, and most of them have seen me, and one and all have been terrified. If only, oh, if only someone would be not terrified, but kind and loving to me, then you see I might be able to change my condition and get away." His voice was so sad that I felt tears start somewhere at the back of my eyes, but fear kept all else in check, and I stood shaking and cold as I listened to him. "Who are you, then? Of course Carrie didn't send you, I know now," I managed to utter. My thoughts scattered dreadfully, and I could think of nothing to say. I was afraid of a stroke. "I know nothing about Carrie or who he is," continued the man quietly, "and the name my body had I have forgotten, thank God. But I am the man who was frightened to death in this house 10 years ago, and I have been frightened ever since, and am frightened still. For the succession of cruel and curious people who come to this house to see the ghost, and thus keep alive its atmosphere of terror, only helps to render my condition worse. If only someone would be kind to me, laugh, speak gently and rationally with me, cry if they like, pity, comfort, soothe me. Anything but come here in curiosity and tremble as you are now doing in that corner. Now, madam, won't you take pity on me?" His voice rose to a dreadful cry. Won't you step out into the middle of the room and try to love me a little?" A horrible laughter came gurgling up in my throat as I heard him, but the sense of pity was stronger than the laughter, and I found myself actually leaving the support of the wall and approaching the center of the floor. "By God," he cried, at once straightening up against the window, "you have done a kind act. That's the first attempt at sympathy that's been shown me since I died, and I feel better already. In life, you know, I was a misanthrope. Everything went wrong with me, and I came to hate my fellow men so much that I couldn't bear to see them even. Of course, like begets like, and this hate was returned. Finally, I suffered from horrible delusions, and my room became haunted with demons that laughed and grimaced. And one night I ran into a whole cluster of them near the bed, and the fright stopped my heart and killed me. It's hate and remorse as much as terror that clogs me so thickly and keeps me here. If only someone could feel pity and sympathy and perhaps a little love for me, I could get away and be happy. When you came this afternoon to see over the house, I watched you, and a little hope came to me for the first time. I saw you had courage, originality, resource, love. If only I could touch your heart without frightening you. I knew I could perhaps tap that love you've stored up in your being there, and thus borrow the wings for my escape. Now I must confess my heart began to ache a little, as fear left me and the man's words sank their sad meaning into me. Still, the whole affair was so incredible, and so touched with unholy quality, and the story of a woman's murder I had come to investigate had so obviously nothing to do with this thing, that I felt myself in a kind of wild dream that seemed likely to stop at any moment and leave me somewhere in bed after a nightmare. Moreover, his words possessed me to such an extent that I found it impossible to reflect upon anything else at all, or to consider adequately any ways or means of action or escape. I moved a little nearer to him in the gloom, horribly frightened, of course, but with the beginnings of a strange determination in my heart. "You women," he continued, his voice plainly thrilling at my approach, "you wonderful women to whom life often brings no opportunity of spending your great love. Oh, if you only could know how many of us simply yearn for it. It would save our souls if but you knew. Few might find the chance that you now have, but if you only spent your love freely, without definite object, just letting it flow openly for all who need, you would reach hundreds and thousands of souls like me and release us. Oh, madam, I ask you again to feel with me, to be kind and gentle, and if you can, to love me a little." My heart did leap within me, and this time the tears did come, for I could not restrain them. I laughed too, for the way he called me madam sounded so odd here in this empty room at midnight in a London street. But my laughter stopped dead and merged with a flood of weeping when I saw how my change of feeling affected him. He had left his place by the window and was kneeling on the floor at my feet, his hands stretched out towards me, and the first signs of a kind of glory about his head. "Put your arms around me and kiss me for the love of God," he cried. "Kiss me, oh, kiss me, and I shall be freed. You've done so much already. Now do this." I stuck there, hesitating, shaking, my determination on the verge of action, yet not quite able to compass it. But the terror had almost gone. "Forget that I'm a man and you're a woman," he continued, in the most beseeching voice I ever heard. "Forget that I'm a ghost, and come out boldly and press me to you with a great kiss, and let your love flow into me. Forget yourself for just 1 minute and do a brave thing. Oh, love me, love me, love me, and I shall be free." The words, or the deep force they somehow released in the center of my being, stirred me profoundly, and an emotion infinitely greater than fear surged up over me and carried me with it across the edge of action. Without hesitation I took 2 steps forwards towards him where he knelt, and held out my arms. Pity and love were in my heart at that moment. Genuine pity, I swear, and genuine love. I forgot myself and my little tremblings in a great desire to help another soul. "I love you, poor aching unhappy thing. I love you," I cried through hot tears, "and I'm not the least bit afraid in the world." The man uttered a curious sound like laughter, yet not laughter, and turned his face up to me. The light from the street below fell on it, but there was another light too, shining all around it, that seemed to come from the eyes and skin. He rose to his feet and met me, and in that second I folded him to my breast and kissed him full on the lips, again and again. All our pipes had gone out, and not even a skirt rustled in that dark studio as the storyteller paused a moment to steady her voice, and put a hand softly up to her eyes before going on again. Now, what can I say, and how can I describe to you, all you sceptical men sitting there with pipes in your mouths, the amazing sensation I experienced of holding an intangible, impalpable thing so closely to my heart that it touched my body with equal pressure all the way down, and then melted away somewhere into my very being? For it was like seizing a rush of cool wind and feeling a touch of burning fire the moment it had struck its swift blow and passed on. A series of shocks ran all over and all through me. A momentary ecstasy of flaming sweetness and wonder thrilled down into me. My heart gave another great leap, and then I was alone. The room was empty. I turned on the gas and struck a match to prove it. All fear had left me, and something was singing round me in the air and in my heart like the joy of a spring morning in youth. Not all the devils or shadows or hauntings in the world could then have caused me a single tremor. I unlocked the door and went all over the dark house, even into the kitchen and cellar and up among the ghostly attics. But the house was empty. Something had left it. I lingered a short hour, analyzing, thinking, wondering. You can guess what and how, perhaps, but I won't detail, for I promised only essentials, remember? And then went out to sleep the remainder of the night in my own flat, locking the door behind me upon a house no longer haunted. But my uncle, Sir Henry, the owner of the house, required an account of my adventure, and of course I was in duty bound to give him some kind of a true story. Before I could begin, however, he held up his hand to stop me. "First," he said, "I wish to tell you a little deception I ventured to practice on you. So many people have been to that house and seen the ghost that I came to think the story acted on their imaginations, and I wished to make a better test. So I invented for their benefit another story, with the idea that if you did see anything, I could be sure it was not due merely to an excited imagination." "Then what you told me about a woman having been murdered and all that was not the true story of the haunting?" "It was not. The true story is that a cousin of mine went mad in that house, and killed himself in a fit of morbid terror, following upon years of miserable hypochondriasis. It is his figure that investigators see." "That explains, then," I gasped. "Explains what?" I thought of that poor struggling soul, longing all these years for escape, and determined to keep my story for the present to myself. "Explains, I mean, why I did not see the ghost of the murdered woman," I concluded. "Precisely," said Sir Henry, "and why, if you had seen anything, it would have had value, inasmuch as it could not have been caused by the imagination working upon a story you already knew."
The Yellow Dog of K University, from Animal Ghosts by Elliot O'Donnell. Reading by Beagle Mixtape. Of the older English universities, many stories are told of bizarre happenings, of duels, ragging, suicides, and such like, in olden times, but of K, venerable, illustrious K of Ireland, few and far between are the accounts of similar occurrences. This is one, however, and it deals with the phantom of a dog. One evening, towards the end of the 18th century, John Kelly, a dean of the college, extremely unpopular on account of his supposed harsh treatment of some of the undergraduates, was about to commence his supper, when he heard a low whine, and looking down, saw a large yellow dog cross the floor in front of him and disappear immediately under the full-length portrait that hung over the antique chimney-piece. Something prompting him, he glanced at the picture. The eyes that looked into his blinked. It must be the result of an overtaxed brain, he said to himself. Those rascally undergraduates have got on my nerves. He shut his eyes, and reopening them, stared hard at the portrait. It was not a delusion. The eyes that gazed back at him were alive with the spirit of mockery. They smiled, laughed, jeered, and as they did so, the knowledge of his surroundings was brought forcibly home to him. The room in which he was seated was situated at the end of a long, cheerless stone passage in the western wing of the college. Away from all of the other rooms of the building, it was absolutely isolated, and had long borne the reputation of being haunted by a dog, which was said to appear only before some catastrophe. The dean had hitherto committed the story to the category of fables, but now, as he sat all alone in that big, silent room, lit only with the reddish rays of a fast-setting August sun, and stared into the gleaming eyes before him, he was obliged to admit the extreme probability of spookdom. Never before had the college seemed so quiet. Not a sound, not even the creaking of a board or the faraway laugh of a student, common enough noises on most nights, fell on his ears. The hush was omnipotent, depressing, unnerving. He could only associate it with the supernatural. Though he was too fascinated to remove his gaze from the thing before him, he could feel the room fill with shadows, and feel them steal through the half-open windows, and, uniting with those already in the corners, glide noiselessly and surreptitiously towards him. He felt, too, that he was under the surveillance of countless invisible visages, all scanning him curiously, and delighted beyond measure at the sight of his terror. The moments passed in a breathless state of tension. He stared at the eyes, and the eyes stared back at him. Once he endeavored to rise, but a dead weight seemed to fall on his shoulders and hold him back, and twice, when he tried to speak, to make some sound, no matter what, to break the appalling silence, his throat closed as if under the pressure of cruel, relentless fingers. But the ultima thule of his emotions had yet to come. There was a slight stir behind the canvas, a thud, a hollow groan that echoed and re-echoed throughout the room like the muffled clap of distant thunder, and the eyes suddenly underwent metamorphosis. They grew glazed and glassy like the eyes of a dead person. A cold shudder ran through the dean. His hair stood on end, his blood turned to ice. Again he essayed to move, to summon help. Again he failed. The strain on his nerves proved more than he could bear. A sudden sensation of nausea surged through him. His eyes swam, his brain reeled. There was a loud buzzing in his ears, and he knew no more. Some moments later, one of the college servants arrived at the door with a bundle of letters, and on receiving no reply to his raps, entered. "Good heavens! What's the matter?" he cried, gazing at the figure of the dean, lolling head downward on the table. "Merciful prudence, the gentleman is dead!" "No, he ain't. Some of the young gents will be sorry enough for that. He's fainted." The good fellow poured out some water in a tumbler, and was proceeding to sprinkle the dean's face with it, when, a noise attracting his attention, he peered round at the picture. It was bulging from the wall. It was falling. And, good God, what was that it was falling with? That huge black object. A coffin? No, not a coffin, but a corpse. The servant ran to the door shrieking, and in less than a minute, passage and room were filled to overflowing with a scared crowd of inquiring officials and undergraduates. "What has happened? What's the matter with the dean? Has he had a fit, or what? And the picture, and Anderson? Anderson lying on the floor? Hurt? No, not hurt. Dead. Murdered. In an instant there was silence, and the white-faced throng closed in on one another as if for protection. In front of them, beside the fallen picture, lay the body of the most gay and popular student in the college, Bob Anderson. Bob Anderson, with a stream of blood running from a deep incision in his back made with some sharp instrument, that had been driven home with tremendous force. He had, without doubt, been murdered. But by whom? Then one of the undergraduates, a bright, boyish, fair-haired giant named O'Farrell, immensely popular both on account of his prowess in sport and an untold number of the most audacious escapades, spoke out. "I saw Anderson about an hour ago, crossing the quadrangle. I asked him where he was going, and he replied, 'To old Kelly. I intend paying him out for gating me last week.' I inquired how, and he replied, 'I've a glorious plan. You know that portrait stuck over his mantel shelf? Well, in poking about the room the other day, when the old man was out, I had a great find. Directly behind the picture is the door of a secret room, so neatly covered by the designs on the wall that it is not discernible. It was only by the merest fluke I discovered it. I was taking down the picture with the idea of touching up the face, when my knuckles bumped against the panels of the wall, touched a spring, and the door flew open, revealing an apartment about 6 by 8 feet large. I at once explored it, and found it could be entered by the chimney. An idea then struck me. I would play a trick upon the dean by hiding in the secret chamber one evening while he was feeding, cutting out the eyes of the portrait, and peering through the cavities at him. And this," O'Farrell continued, pointing at the fallen picture, "is what he evidently did after I left him. You can see the eyes of the portrait have been removed." "That is so, sure," one of the undergraduates, Mick McGuire, 6'2" in his socks every inch, exclaimed. "And what is more, I knew all about it. Anderson told me yesterday what he was going to do, and I wanted to join him. But he said I would never get up the chimney. I would stick there. And bedad, I think he was right." At this remark, despite the grimness of the moment, several of those present laughed. "Come, come, gentlemen," one of the officials cried. "This is no time for levity. Mr. Anderson has been murdered, and the question is, by whom?" "Then if that's the only thing that is troubling you," O'Farrell put in, "I fancy the solution is right here at hand." And he looked significantly at the dean. An ominous silence followed, during which all eyes were fixed on John Kelly, some anxiously, some merely inquiringly, but not a few angrily, for Kelly, as I have said before, had made himself particularly obnoxious just then by his behavior to the rowdier students, and, as has ever been the case at K, these formed no small portion of the community. The dean hardly seemed to realize the situation. The dignity of office blinded him to danger. "What do you mean?" he spluttered. "I know nothing of what happened to Mr. Anderson. Really, really, O'Farrell, your presumption is preposterous." "There was no one else in here but you and he, Mr. Kelly," O'Farrell retorted coolly. "It's only natural we should think you know something of what happened." On the arrival of the police, who had been sent for somewhat reluctantly, for the prestige of the college at that date was very dear to all, the premises were thoroughly searched, and no other culprit being found, first of all Dean Kelly was apprehended, and then, to make a good job of it, his accuser, Dennis O'Farrell. All the college was agog with excitement. No one could believe the dean was a murderer, and it was just as inconceivable to think O'Farrell had committed the deed. And yet, if neither of them had killed Anderson, who in God's name had killed him? The night succeeding the affair, while the dean and O'Farrell were still in jail awaiting the inquest, a party of undergraduates were discussing the situation in McGuire's rooms, when the door burst open, and into their midst, almost breathless with excitement, came a measly bespectacled youth named Brady, Patrick Brady. "I'm awfully sorry to disturb you fellows," he stammered, "but there have been odd noises just outside my room all the evening, and I've just seen a queer kind of dog that vanished, God knows how. Well, you will call me an ass, of course, but I'm afraid to stay there alone, and that's the long and short of it." "Begorra," McGuire exclaimed, "it can't be poor Bob's ghosts already. What sort of noises were they?" "Noises like laughter," Brady said. "Loud peals of horrid laughter." "Someone trying to frighten you," one of the undergrads observed, "and faith he succeeded. You are twice as white as any sheet." It's ill-timed mirth anyhow, someone else put in, with Anderson's dead body upstairs. I'm for making an example of the blackguard. And I, the others echoed. A general movement followed, and headed by Brady, the procession moved to the north wing of the college. At that time, be it remembered, a large proportion of K undergrads were in residence. Now it is otherwise. On reaching Brady's rooms, the crowd halted outside and listened. For some time there was silence, and then a laugh, low, monotonous, unmirthful, metallic, coming as it were from some adjacent chamber, and so unnatural, so abhorring, that it held everyone spellbound. It died away in the reverberations of the stone corridor, its echo seeming to awake a chorus of other laughs hardly less dreadful. Again there was silence, no one daring to express his thoughts. Then, as if by common consent, all turned precipitately into Brady's room and slammed the door. "That is what I heard," Brady said. "What does it mean?" "Is it the meaning of it you're wanting to know?" McGuire observed. "Sure 'tis the devil, for no one but him could make such a noise. I've never heard the like of it before. Who has the rooms on either side of you?" "These?" Brady replied, pointing to the right. "No one. They were vacated at Easter and are being repainted and decorated. These on the left, Dobson, who I happen to know, is at the present moment in County Mayo. He won't be back till next week." "Then we can search them," a student called Hartnell intervened. "To be sure we can," Brady replied, "but I doubt if you'll find anyone." A search was made, and Brady proved to be correct. Not a vestige of anyone was discovered. Much mystified, McGuire's party was preparing to depart, when Hartnell, who had taken the keenest interest in the proceedings, suddenly said, "Who has the rooms over yours, Brady? Sound, as you know, plays curious tricks, and it is just as likely as not that that laugh came from above." "Oh, I don't think so," Brady answered. "The man overhead is Belton, a very decent sort. He is going in for his final shortly, and is sweating fearfully hard at present. We might certainly ask him if he heard the noise." The students agreeing, Brady led the way upstairs, and in response to their summons, Belton hastily opened the door. He was a typical bookworm, thin, pale, and rather emaciated, but with the pleasant expression in his eyes and mouth that all felt was assuring. "Halloa!" he exclaimed. "It isn't often I'm favored with a surprise party of this sort. Come in." And he pressed them so hard that they felt constrained to accept his hospitality, and before long all were seated round the fire, quaffing whiskey and puffing cigars as if they meant to make a night of it. At 2 o'clock someone suggested that it was high time they thought of bed, and Belton rose with them. "Before we turn in, let's have another search," he said. "It's strange you should all hear that noise except me, unless, of course, it came from below." "But there's nothing under me," Brady remarked, "except the dining hall." "Then let's search that," Belton went on. "We ought to make a thorough job of it now once we've begun. Besides, I don't relish being in this lonely place with that laugh knocking around any more than you do." He went with them, and they completely overhauled the ground floor, hall, dining room, studies, passages, vestibules, everywhere that was not barred to them. But they were no wiser at the end of their search than at the beginning. There was not the slightest clue as to the author of the laugh. On the morrow there was a fresh shock. One of the college servants, on entering Mr. McGuire's room to call him, found that gentleman half-dressed and laying on the floor. Terrified beyond measure, the servant bent over him and discovered he was dead, obviously stabbed with the same weapon that had put an end to Bob Anderson. The factotum at once gave the alarm. Everyone in the college came trooping to the room, and for the second time within 3 days a general hue and cry was raised. All again to no purpose. The murderer had left no traces as to his identity. However, one thing at least was established, and that was the innocence of Dean Kelly and Dennis O'Farrell. They were both liberated. Then Hartnell, who seems to have been a regular Sherlock Holmes, got to work in grim earnest. On the floor in McGuire's room he picked up a diminutive silver-top pencil, which had rolled under the fender and had so escaped observation. He asked several of McGuire's most intimate friends if they remembered seeing the pencil case in McGuire's possession, but they shook their heads. He inquired in other quarters too, but with no better result, and finally resolved to ask Brady, who belonged to quite a different set from himself. With that object in view, he set off to Brady's room shortly after supper. As there was no response to his raps, he at length opened Brady's door. In front of the hearth, in a big easy-chair, sat a figure. Brady, by all that's holy, Hartnell exclaimed. By Jupiter, the beggar's asleep. That's what comes of swatting too hard. Brady? Approaching the chair, he called again. Brady? And getting no reply, patted the figure gently on the back. Be jabbers, you sleep soundly, old fellow, he said. How about that? And he shook him heartily by the shoulder. The instant he let go, the figure collapsed. In order to get a closer view, Hartnell then struck a light with the tinderbox. The flickering of the candle flame fell on Brady's face. It was white, ghastly white. There was no animation in it. The jaw dropped. With a cry of horror, Hartnell sprung back, and as he did so, a great yellow dog dashed across the hearth in front of him, whilst from somewhere close at hand came a laugh, long, low, and satirical. A cold terror gripped Hartnell, and for a moment or so he was on the verge of fainting. However, hearing voices in the quadrangle, he pulled himself together, approached the window on tiptoe, and peering through the glass, perceived to his utmost joy two of his friends directly beneath him. I say, you fellows, he called in low tones, come up here quickly. Brady's rooms. I've seen the phantom dog. There's been another tragedy, and the murderer is close at hand. Come quietly, and we may catch him. He then retraced his steps to the center of the room and listened. Again there came the laugh, subtle, protracted, hellish, and it seemed to him as if it must originate in the room overhead. A noise in the direction of the hearth made him look round. Some loose plaster had fallen, and while he still gazed, more fell. The truth of the whole thing then dawned on him. The murderer was in the chimney! Hartnell was a creature of impulse. In the excitement of the moment he forgot danger, and the dastardly nature of the crimes gave him more than his usual amount of courage. He rushed at the chimney, and regardless of soot and darkness, began an impromptu ascent. Halfway up, something struck him. Once, twice, thrice, sharply, and there was a soft, malevolent chuckle. At this juncture the two undergraduates arrived in Brady's room. No one was there, nothing save a hunched-up figure on a chair. "Hartnell!" they whispered. "Hartnell!" No reply. They called again. Still no reply. Again and again they called, until at length through sheer fatigue they desisted, and seized with a sudden panic, fled precipitately down the stairs and out into the quadrangle. Once more the alarm was given, and once again the whole college, wild with excitement, hastened to the scene of the outrage. This time there was a double mystery. Brady had been murdered. Hartnell had disappeared. The police were summoned and the whole building ransacked, but no one thought of the chimney till the search was nearly over, and half the throng, overcome with fatigue, had retired. O'Farrell was the discoverer. Happening to glance at the hearth, he saw something drop. "For heaven's sake, you fellows!" he shouted. "Look! Blood! You may take it from me, there's a corpse in the chimney!" A dozen candles invaded the hearth, and a Herculean policeman undertook the ascent. In breathless silence the crowd below waited, and after a few seconds of intense suspense, two helpless legs appeared on the hob. Bit by bit the rest of the body followed, until at length the whole figure of Hartnell, black, bleeding, and blood-stained, was disclosed to view. At first it was thought that he was dead, but the surgeon, who had hurried to the scene pronouncing him still alive, there arose a tremendous cheer. The murder had at all events been foiled this time. "Begorra!" cried O'Farrell, "Hartnell was going after the murderer when he was struck, and sure I'll be after him the same way myself." And before anyone could prevent him, O'Farrell was up the chimney. Up, 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 until he found himself going down, 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 and then, bedad, he stepped right out onto the floor of Belton's room. "Hulloa!" the latter exclaimed, looking not a bit disconcerted. "That's a curious mode of making your entrance into my domain. Why didn't you come by the door?" "Because," O'Farrell replied, pointing to a patch of soot near the washstand, "I followed you. Own up, Dickie Belton. You're the culprit. You did for them all." And Belton laughed. Yes, it was true, overwork had turned Belton's brain, and he was subsequently sent to a criminal lunatic asylum for the rest of his life. But there were moments when he was comparatively sane, and in these interims he confessed everything. Anderson had told him that he was going to hoax the dean, and filled with indignation at the idea of such a trick being played on a college official, for he, Belton, was a great favorite with the Beaks, he had accompanied Anderson on the plea of helping him, intending in reality to frustrate him. It was not till he was in the chimney, crouching behind Anderson, that the thought of killing his fellow students had entered his mind. The heat of his hiding place, acting on an already overworked brain, hastened on the madness, and his fingers closing on a clasped knife in one of his pockets inspired him with the desire to kill. The work once begun, he had argued with himself, would have to be continued, and he had then and there decided that all unruly graduates should be exterminated. With what measure of success this determination was carried out need not be recapitulated here, but with regard to the phantom dog a few words may be added. Since it appeared immediately before the committal of each of the 3 murders I have just recorded, it was seen by Mr. Kelly before the death of Bob Anderson, by Brady before the murder of McGuire, and by Hartnell before Brady was murdered, I think there can neither be doubts as to its existence nor as to the purport of its visits. Moreover, its latest appearance in the university, reported to me quite recently, preceded a serious outbreak of fire.